The Single Guy was a show. This 2-season hangout show was about Jonathan Elliott, the only single friend remaining in a group of longtime friends. That is actually the entire premise. He's single. His friends are married. Join Brynn, Aaron, and Barry as they try to find Mr. or Mrs. Right in yet another sitcom about how hard it is to date as a semi-successful New Yorker.
We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince. But those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Burney,
Aaron Yeager,
and Andrew Helmer as Barry.
A Radio Gizmo production.
Hey Barry, how's it going?
Hi, Aaron. Hello. How are you?
Fancy meeting you here on Zoom.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
Boy.
So, watching this show, which you will detail soon, I will just say got me thinking a lot about the time period when it was made. And something that we don't often talk a lot about in setting up these shows is just like where we were in life, what age and what we were watching and what was going on like at the time when a show was on. Mm-hmm. And so this show, starting in 95, I guess we were 10 and 12 years old, respectively, but we were all kind of already children, but we were all already watching a lot of sitcoms and a lot of sitcoms aimed at Gen X adults.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this show in particular that we're talking about was part of the NBC Thursday night must-see TV lineup, which was like that was the big dog. In 1995. That was like...
Absolutely.
That was the top of the heap. Not to reference a show that we talked about in the past called Top of the Heap. That was not intentional. And so I was kind of thinking like, that really was like for appointment television when it was like, I need to arrange my week around being able to sit in front of the TV at a particular time. That was the time.
Yeah. Thursday nights.
I missed that.
Thursday nights between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And then it would continue on with like ER or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would always watch ER after after the Thursday night.
Yeah, it's funny. I wonder what it is about Thursdays. Probably because it's like not, quite the weekend yet, but you're looking forward to the weekend, and then Friday night, presumably. If you're like an adult, you might have plans. So
I bet NBC really tried to figure out what it was that made it tick. Yeah. I mean, because I think it's something they definitely stumbled on. So it's interesting. Yeah, but Must See Thursday was definitely a thing. I miss that. I honestly do miss that because like this is really like pathetic, but like I really do miss like having to watch something at a certain time. Because most nights I can't figure out anything to watch, and then I waste time just cycling through the same old shit, right? So to have a 2-hour block of comedy to watch, that would be kind of nice. I mean, and like 10 years ago NBC had another lineup there where they did on Thursdays, and they had they had The Office and Parks and Rec and
it was like 2.0
and Community and 30 Rock for just stellar shows. So anyway, I don't know if I would call that as a preamble, but let's just say that was way more on topic than we usually are when we start this thing.
And you didn't say hi to me at the beginning, Aaron. I felt very left out.
I feel like at this point
I know that you're next to me,
the audience is
it's
aware.
A little rude.
The audience is aware that we live together at this point.
Yeah, it's not like a will they, won't they with you guys.
But there could be a first-time listener, guys. Like, whatever. Yeah.
Fair enough. Enough.
Woe is you, first time listener.
Yeah.
Well, then
woe is you.
I'll take it a step further and say, not only hi, Brynn, but welcome to the couch. We now have a routine where we actually record in our living room, sitting on the couch, facing in the direction toward our TV as if we were watching TV. So
feels appropriate.
It feels appropriate.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Yeah. I mean, we used to have a different setup at our previous place, and it was more official. Well, not like more official, but it felt more, you know.
It was an office.
It was an office. And now I kind of like this.
A place of business.
Yeah, this feels more like, you know, we're sitting there and chatting about, you know, TV, which we literally are.
You're better on a couch than you are on an old rickety chair.
On an old rickety chair, I'm squirming and I'm fidgeting and I'm, you know.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Aaron would constantly be gesturing to me in the old setup to like cut it out because I was making noise with my fidgeting. But
I can't recommend enough recording across the city from Aaron because he can't do shit to me here. He can't correct. Every now and then he's like, "Oh, are you close enough to the mic?" And I'd be like, "I don't know. You'll figure it out in the editing room."
I know, and you know.
Do you want to fix your position? No, not really.
Nah.
And you know that it eats me up a little inside to not have that degree of control.
Yeah.
I know it does.
Barry, what are you drinking? Are you rocking some kombucha like I am?
No, I'm drinking
I'm not even drinking kombucha. I'm drinking probiotic soda. Excuse me. Sorry. Anyway.
I bought you the kombucha you asked for.
Well, I didn't see it.
One could be excused for mistaking the two. I conflate them. I am drinking a Perrier energy drink.
Oh my God, it's like a callback to our undergrad days.
Yeah, it is.
Energy drinks.
I've been putting putting our archive on YouTube. Everybody out there, go listen to our YouTube. Listen to the same shows that you've already listened to on YouTube. And there's like one episode I stumbled on where it's just the opening of the episode is just like 2 straight minutes of us talking about what types of energy drinks we like. And I was just like, that's some good shit. I should bring that back sometime.
Yeah.
That's what you call top quality content.
Yeah. And it's worth adding that to our official preamble here that, yes, now that our archives are up on YouTube, for anyone listening who has friends who refuse to listen to podcasts anywhere but YouTube, you can now recommend this show to them.
We're not on camera or anything. You know, it's not one of those podcasts, but it's got, you know, we make it cool. We make it cool to watch.
No, we don't. No, we don't.
No, but what it does do is
the content itself is cool. It's just like sells itself.
Yeah. But it does therefore have those algorithms that connect the subject matter of each episode with other potential things of interest to you, which doesn't happen elsewhere.
We do get linked, I notice, from the shows that we talk about. So somebody will be watching old sitcoms and be like, "Oh, hey, here's somebody talking about it. Mm-hmm. Hey, wait a minute, why don't they like it?"
I mean, okay, to be fair, we do like a lot of stuff that we cover. I mean, it's not everything, but, you know.
And we're Canadians, so when we don't like it, we're very sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are. That's good. Great segue. Great segue into an actual podcast, because I actually did like this week's show. Been a while since I think I've actually enjoyed one of the shows we watched. Let's just jump in.
Yep.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we watched The Single Guy, which, as was in all that preamble there, was indeed on Thursday nights alongside some of, NBC's greats like Friends and Seinfeld. And I specifically mention those two because I feel like this show is a perfect amalgamation of the two shows.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near as good or near anywhere close to as funny as Seinfeld, but I would say from the 2 episodes I saw, it is operating at about the same level of success as Friends. if it got canned, it's just because it's just the same show almost as Friends. Like it's just people hanging out in New York and like getting into wacky hijinks. It's probably a little less wacky than say Friends was. And its characters a little bit more grounded, but maybe that's more along the lines of just how Friends was when it started. So this is 95. So this would have been, a good, this would have been the second season of Friends, second or third, whatever. Not looking it up. Friends started in 90. Friends started in Friends started in 94. This is 95. So let's just assume Friends is in its second season. Unless this was a mid-season show, who the fuck knows? Anybody who researched the episode that they chose, maybe, but not me. And yeah, that's essentially it. It's about a writer named Jonathan, who is played by Jonathan Silverman. So he didn't have to learn a character name. We always love when comedians do that. And he is just the only single friend, which honestly is not completely unrelatable to myself. I'm not the only single friend, but a lot of the times I am. So yeah, it's his friends are constantly trying to set him up on dates, or just, his singlehood really does seem to bother them more than it bothers him.
Yep.
I hope we don't do that.
No, you guys could set me up every now and then. I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say no.
I mean, we think about it, but there's nobody.
Undateable.
No, I know you are. You're very dateable. There's nobody good enough.
No, I meant the people in this city. Undateable.
Yeah, undateable. Yeah.
So the rest of the cast is kind of rounded out.
Yeah.
You've got, he has two breast friends, really. He has two best friends. Yeah, one of them's a breast friend. He has two best friends. One of them is played by Friends' Jessica Hecht, who is his longtime friend Janine. She has a husband named Matt, who's played by Mark Moses. His other best friend, Joey Slotnick, is kind of a veteran of TV and movies. And his wife is played by yet another TV veteran, Ming-Na, who this is one of the earliest things I think I've seen her in. And this is a woman who has just worked consistently on TV for a good, almost 30 years now. So she's great here too. And honestly, the cast is mostly great. I'll go through the pilot and then we can just kind of do that thing that we do, which is talk about shows. So the pilot, like I said, pick up with a semi-successful writer who's living in New York City. Jonathan Elliott is the only friend in a group of married friends. The Hangout series follows the gang closely. His dating exploits are the primary focus in at least the episodes we saw. Rounding out the cast, Ernest Borgnine is Jonathan's doorman, who he seems to share kind of a friendship with. And he's very funny. I mean, he's Ernest Borgnine, so that's kind of fun.
He's a delight.
The pilot is on the same night as a big George Foreman fight, which Jonathan has purchased on pay-per-view. He's forced into a blind double date setup at Janine and Matt's. Though initially taken with the girl's appearance, he quickly sours after spending the dinner listening to her constantly name-dropping celebrities that she has encountered through various things. She works at Time magazine. It's at the same time they're watching the fight over at Jonathan's. First, it's his buddy Sam, Ernest Borgnine, and then the cable guy who's guest starred by Larry Miller, who's a sitcom stalwart as well. It cuts back and forth between them watching the game. Not a lot really going on there. They're watching the game. It cuts over to the pay-per-view has porn as well, which is I don't know if Friends had already done that episode where they have the free porn.
Probably.
But it's the same thing. And honestly, it just goes back and forth between the two. It is a really, really plot light pilot, which not a lot of setting up to do, and completely fine with that. It's a show that, like, pretty much right from the get-go, like, it probably sounds like I loved the show. Did not love it. Liked the show. It was fine. I was just impressed that it seems like it's working almost right out of the gate. Like the dialogue back and forth between all the characters is so lived in, and it seems to spend very little time on exposition because its writers realize it's a hangout show. It's about a group of friends who are hanging out. You don't need to go through their histories all at once because you'll get there. I'm sure we didn't quite get the whole Friends' backstories in one episode.
Yeah.
The pilot was completely fine. Blind double date setup, very classic sitcom trope. This show is just nothing but tropes.
Yeah,
really.
Trope.
Yeah, it's just trope. And probably nothing, we'll get to it later, obviously. The second episode is a classic 90s gay panic episode, which we have not seen yet, which I'm really surprised. Maybe we've just sort of skipped over them, but it was our first gay panic episode.
Yeah, we've encountered gay panic moments, lines of dialogue, scenes, but never a full episode plot arc based around that.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that one. Let's talk about the pilot. What did you guys think? What's the deal here?
Go for it, Aaron. You look like you got a lot of opinions.
I mean, the big thing I'm excited to say is I feel like I've been waiting to talk about this show or like watch and analyze this show since we started this podcast. Because when I think of like, for me in my mind, shows from that period in the 90s that did not quite succeed, that I was aware of, this is like one of those top listed shows, but also I never watched it at the time. I mean, I'm sure I caught one or two episodes, but I never watched it at the time. And there's no good reason for that because I watched Friends, I watched Seinfeld. This was in between the two of them. I was watching sitcoms in that year. There's no specific reason why I didn't. And I can't really place why. So I was very excited to watch and analyze this show and try to understand why, adolescent Aaron never, like the fish hook never caught me with this one, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if I was just going to the bathroom between the two shows or what.
Getting the chips, going to the bathroom.
Never watched this.
Okay, so it's pretty wild that you guys both have that experience because I'm the exact opposite. I did watch this show and was like a fan, like 10-year-old Brynn was a big fan of this show and watched it every week and grieved its cancellation. I don't even know how to bring up this second point. Like we'll get into it after we discuss the two episodes we watch. I have like another kind of episode to sort of just discuss a little bit because it was something that was like vivid in my memory. And I forced Aaron to watch it last night. But yeah, I mean, the pilot, as far as like pilot is concerned, I thought it did its job. It was, and I have to say, the idea of watching a pay-per-view fight is very much a trope as well. And especially for these like New York based sitcoms, like I just feel like that's like such a thing. Like everyone is tuning into the big fight.
Sitcoms in general. I mean, Simpsons did it. I think Home Improvement did it.
It's
like
such
everything.
A thing.
It's such a trope.
It was, but I think that was just popular in the 90s, wasn't it? Like,
it's no different than say people watching like UFC now.
Yeah, but
right?
is
like,
that as mainstream popular as like those kinds of fights with like for example, I think of the like Mike Tyson Evander Holyfield like fight, like that was like the biggest thing ever, and like the ear biting and all of that, like that was like the everyone knew about that. Whereas I feel like with UFC fighting, I don't feel like everybody knows about that. I feel like yes, it's very popular, but we wouldn't know about those people. If that makes sense. Maybe,
we might if something of that of a similar incident happened.
But I know what you mean. This presents the big fight almost as if it's like the Super Bowl or the World Series. It's presented as a very mainstream sport, and it probably in sitcoms presents boxing as somewhat more mainstream and popular than it actually was.
Yeah,
I was going to say that. I was going to say, this is just like the 90s, but This is just what I know from TV in the 90s.
Yeah, my guess is that boxing in the 90s was not more popular than UFC is now. If anything, probably less popular. But the way it was treated by mainstream pop culture, much bigger.
Yeah, I think so. We should also mention that Jonathan's name-dropping blind date is played by Olivia Dabo, which is was like a huge, player in a lot of 90s TV and movies. And she, I associate her most as being Kevin Arnold's hippie older sister Karen in the Wonder Years. And yeah, I mean, she's just in everything back then. And she plays like this kind of pretentious, like name dropper, as we've said. And they kind of have like a funny back and forth where they don't really like each other, but then they start arguing and it gets to a point where they decide to go get a drink together just out of spite, just to be like, so it's that I thought that part was kind of funny where they leave the dinner at Janine and Matt's and they're like, she's basically like, well, we're not going to go out again. Like, this is not going to happen. And he was like, kind of challenging that in a set. I don't know. It's almost like neither one of them wanted to be the one that was less desirable or something.
Neither one of them wanted to be the one who was being rejected by the other.
I get that.
Yeah,
I get that.
It was kind of amusing that way. And then like they were going to go out and they were going to go out to the specific bar where she says that her papa, and I'm not clear whether it's
No. Her grandfather hung out there with Papa. Papa was Ernest Hemingway's nickname.
Oh, okay. I misinterpreted that. But anyway, there's a whole plot where they're supposed to, she keeps talking about, her dad hanging out with Ernest Hemingway.
Her grandfather.
And then you're supposed to go to that same bar, and when they go to the bar, it's like burnt down, and she's like devastated. And I thought it was very dramatic and weird. Like it was kind of like it was an old fucking building. What do you want?
Well, I think that was the point. Is that it's like
I know that was the point.
It makes her the undateable weirdo.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One point about all of it that I really liked, and I kind of related to as like a struggling single something, but like he really doesn't like this girl.
Yeah.
And then they're repeatedly talking to him after it. And like, you gonna call her again? And he's like, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's just like, he's like, man, I got nothing else going on.
Yeah.
The show does certain things well. My reaction overall, big picture, very similar to what you said, Barry. I didn't love this show, but it was fine. When I watch it now, I'm thinking like, what I wrote down in my notes is basically the same thing you said, which is that it's trying to do some of the same things as Seinfeld. It's trying to do some of the same things as Friends. As compared to Seinfeld, it's not nearly as successful in those regards. As compared to the hangout style that Friends does, it is kind of in the same ballpark. It doesn't necessarily add anything to that world.
It feels like a little bit, I don't know. It feels like kind of unnecessary because it's like they already have two New York hangout shows. In the same
I would imagine
time block.
that would be the cancellation
That's
reason.
what did it in.
It's just like
it's just redundant.
Yeah, it's redundant.
Think it's funny though, because like I think it's for a first and sixth episode of a show, it is remarkably well formed. It doesn't need time to grow or anything. But because like Seinfeld had a rough start, and Friends maybe a little less of a rough start. But it's just like, because those shows exist, it has no chance, right? If either one of those shows didn't exist, it probably would have done, 6 seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, there isn't a specific reason when you watch it where it jumps out at you as like, oh, this is why it failed. Like, I mean, it is.
It's clever.
For what it's trying to do.
It's a great cast.
It is firing on all cylinders from like the first minute. It is it hits the ground running surprisingly well. The dialogue's tight, the acting is good. The pivotal character, this single guy, he feels kind of vague, and between his personality and the title, it does feel a little bit like, you know,
it's
designed by committee. It feels a little bit like, you can see how they wanted to take elements from Seinfeld and Friends and create this. Like, you can see what they're trying to do too much, I think.
Yeah. It's a Jonathan Silverman vehicle, and I'm not sure Jonathan Silverman is somebody who needed a vehicle.
Yeah.
Like, he's completely fine. I mean, I've seen this fucking character so many times now in sitcoms.
He's like, kind of a Ted Mosby.
He's a Ted Mosby, Ross Geller. Yep. He's a Ted Mosby, Ross Geller.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use that as a perfect segue into, let's talk a little bit about episode 6.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Now,
I'm excited for
this.
I
imagine Brynn, having vetted the show, knew going in what we were going to get here. But I did try to get Aaron to not look into this. So, Aaron, did you know what was going to happen in this episode?
So the first reaction I had when I started watching it...
You thought I was talking about Milos.
Milos.
Yeah.
Look at the big baby. Yeah, my first reaction was that the thing that you wanted me to take away as a surprise that you didn't want me to spoil was the appearance of the actor who plays Milos on the episode of Seinfeld where he's the really, really terrible tennis player who runs the pro shop at the tennis club.
But that was not the surprise that I wanted to hide, which, to be honest, I enjoyed as well, because, you know, he's a very funny actor, and he was very funny in this as well. So, episode 6, after his apartment is flooded due to some sort of mischief by a neighbor's cat, Jonathan is taken in by the kindly neighbors upstairs, who, to everyone's huge shock, are, gasp, gay. Actually, it's not really a shock. No one really cares, which is sad to say for 1995 is about as good representation as good as representation got for homosexuality on TV.
I will say the way that couple was presented was, I thought, really good and not stereotypical.
Yeah, they weren't overly
anything.
cliched or anything.
Yeah. What actually does follow is a very specific subgenre of the gay panic trope, in that Jonathan, despite being very accepting of his neighbors, doesn't want people to think he's gay. A plotline that comes up in Friends, in Seinfeld, in every other sitcom you're thinking about in the mid-90s. But where that gets really interesting is that comes to a head with a potential friendship with one of Janine's friends, a New York paleontologist, Dr. Ross Geller, played by David Schwimmer here.
So it's a crossover.
It's a crossover.
Full-blown crossover.
Full-blown crossover.
The NBC Gen X single guy in the city cinematic universe, if you will. And honestly, it's funny for a lot of reasons, because one, David Schwimmer's very funny in this. He also gets to play Ross away from the friends, and you sort of go like, he's a lot more likable
outside of that friend group.
Like like they respect him for being a paleontologist. People are asking. So it all just sort of becomes like this like cute little like bromance that starts between Jonathan and Ross Geller. And you're just like, oh man, I kind of wish Ross would hang out with this guy more, because Ross is very likable here. And it's so weird. But also, so the whole thing is neither Ross nor Jonathan both of them are convinced the other one is gay. Neither of them have a hard time with that, but they don't want to hurt the other one's feelings, thinking that they're not into them. And it's funny.
They're both worried about leading the other one on, basically.
They're both, and then later, like, Jonathan is worried about disappointing his neighbors that he's not gay, and like,
so he comes out to them as straight.
Yeah.
Because the neighbors are convinced that he's gay, and it's like this delicate thing of like, you know, he doesn't want other people to think that he's gay, but he's kind of like, I don't want to hurt their feelings. So it's like this weird, it's still problematic. Like, let's not get, like, it's still problematic, but it's not the most problematic. Like, there's a pros and cons column for this episode. It's very interesting.
There is nuance to it. There is nuance to it.
It's mostly pros.
Yeah.
There's some language that I wasn't a fan of that, to be honest, I heard way worse in the 90s, but I still didn't want to hear it here. And late, and like last week, I still didn't like hearing it here. I mean, very interestingly, I watched this episode first because I wanted to see, as soon as I found out that this existed, I was like, I want to see if, I knew I was going to watch the pilot, so I was like, whatever. And I was like, all right, I want to see if this one's even worth, like, if it's too bad, I'm not watching it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not making you guys watch it. So I watched it. And like, the first thing is I didn't like Joey Slotnick's character because in this episode, he's a little bit more, he is taking more of, he's not bigoted, but he's also like just a little less, I don't know. He's just a little less tolerant than the other characters are. Yeah. And that was my first impression with him. And I thought this guy would just be some obnoxious piece of shit. And then I watched the pilot and it's like, he's obnoxious, but he's fine.
He's well-meaning. He's just kind of a dick. Yeah.
He's just kind of a dick. It's just such a weird take on like a gay panic. And I don't know why, but it really tickled me just using the main character from another show. And also like it making sense because you're just like, yeah, I get this. All of their misinterpretations around each other. I'm like, I get it. And Ross, I get it. Like, you know, Ross is kind of he has some tendencies as well that one might misconstrue in the mid 90s where everything slightly hyper masculine could be questioned. Yeah. So it was interesting.
Yeah. I do have to say one thing that really broke my brain a little bit was that
I know. I knew this would bother you.
You know where this was leading. It's the Jessica Hecht of it all, right? Yeah. Because Jessica Hecht famously plays Carol, or no, Susan. She's Susan. She's Susan in Friends. So in Friends, she plays Ross's ex-wife's
new wife,
partner and eventual
her
wife.
Yeah.
So it's already established that Ross has a relationship with this character played by this specific actor, and now they're friends in another context in this show, but she's not playing that character. She's playing another character. And there's no kind of like joke about that or anything like that. I thought it would be kind of funny if they made a joke or like if he were like, you look so much like maybe he confused her for Susan. And that's why he like started like talking to her one day or something. Like that would have been kind of funny because otherwise, like some of us that know all these story worlds so well are just like, what the hell? Like,
felt it's a contradiction. Well, I want to pose a question.
It's annoying. It's just annoying to me.
I forgot to research this.
Yeah,
these come up a lot in
what I want to know is
in comic book scenarios.
When was the first episode of Friends that showed her?
Susan's introduced in the first season.
Yeah, in the first season. She's already there. She's already in the world. Carol was recast, actually. So Carol wasn't originally oh my god, I'm blanking on her name. But in the first episode where we see Carol, she's a completely different actress.
Okay.
But Susan,
you're saying Jessica Hecht has already appeared on Friends
Jessica
by
Hecht
this point.
Has always been Susan.
Once or twice.
No. I know she's always been Susan.
Yeah.
I just don't know what episode she appears on camera.
I believe she already had.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe she already had because
so their wedding
is early on.
Yeah, their wedding is early on, but also there's all those episodes leading up to the birth of his son Ben. And Susan's there for all of it. And like in the show, in Single Guy, he talks about his son Ben. So Ben has already been born and all this. So
he even talks about Susan on the show.
Yeah, he even mentioned Susan.
That's true. That's true.
It's like just annoying. Like I wish they would have done something about that. Because
this thing doesn't really bother me. In fact, it bothers me. This shit comes up in like comic book stuff a lot. Like, you know, in the Marvel stuff, like Alfred Woodard has played two separate characters. I prefer not mentioning it personally. I think I'm taken out of it if you mention it because I think you're just being cute. Whereas I think the writers were there's no story. There's no story reason to do this, so let's ignore it.
Yeah.
But then on that same point, there's no story reason to bring Ross into the fold.
Sure there was. It all made sense for Ross to be there.
Well,
like also like from a
know.
synergistic point of view too.
He was there to give the show a boost. And there's another episode that Julia Louis-Dreyfus appears in.
Which, did we even mention that Brad Hall created this show? Mr. Julia Louis-Dreyfus?
I didn't know who that was.
No, so Brad Hall, the creator of this show, is Julia Louis-Dreyfus's husband. They've been together since forever. They were together when this show was made.
They were on SNL together.
Yeah. So they were together since before this show, since before Seinfeld, since forever. And so he's the creator of this show. And she makes a cameo appearance, not as Elaine, but as like a unique character.
I think he dates her, I think.
Yeah, he dates her.
Jonathan dates her.
In one of the episodes of this, which I'm now kind of curious to watch. But yeah, there were these deliberate moves clearly that NBC was making to, present these
very common
use of cameos, guest appearances, things like that. And done pretty well, actually, as from a comedic standpoint. One of the things that, part of this whole gay panic plot. So, one of the recurring lines from Sam is him telling other characters that, anyone can be gay. And because there's a lot of dialogue around questioning whether...
But he doesn't mean that in a good way. That's the problem.
He means it in a way where to him it's funny. Like it's a big joke to him. And like I agree with you, Barry, that he was the most problematic part of the episode, probably. But anyway, I just wanted to reference a specific bit where they were talking about someone named Alexander Haig. And I had to look it up because they just kept repeating this joke about how like even Alexander Haig could be gay. No way he is. Yeah. Well, even he could be. And I had to look him up. So he was the Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan. And so that at least makes the joke make a little bit of sense.
Okay.
That's funnier.
But if you think about the pilot episode, one of the things that made the woman that he almost dates annoying is the name dropping that she's constantly doing.
It was a lot of conservative people.
And she talks about how proud she is to have met and interviewed Margaret Thatcher and George Bush. And he finds that immediately insufferable. They don't say why, but it's kind of implied that maybe she's more of she's a Republican and he's not. They never use those words or say it, but it's just kind of a tone. So it was an interesting immediate callback to be like, okay, they're throwing in these sort of political references, but not really talking about it, which a lot of shows in the 90s did. And then they even extended the crossover with Friends in dialogue to Ross talking about how a buddy of his auditioned for this play that they're going to and names this buddy as this actor named Joey.
Yeah.
And so they're really like tying it all together.
Yeah, they're trying to do something there.
I did like the one thing I did like about the Alexander Haig thing, despite thank you for looking that up because I didn't bother. Is I do like he's like anybody could be gay. Alexander Haig could be gay. And he's like he couldn't be, or he's like, oh, I'm picturing Alexander Haig right now with naked with another man, and let me tell you, he's pretty gay. I like that joke because I mean, really, it's you picturing other men here, not. Yeah. It's. I think the joke is how clueless he is.
Right. And that's like anybody can be gay, including you. Like,
Yeah,
because he's so, I don't know. But it's, I don't know. I think it's better than the Seinfeld. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
I think it is too. And I would say it's better than any of the numerous episodes on Friends that cover
Friends
this.
famously did not handle that well.
The joke isn't on any of the gay characters.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The gay characters are wonderful.
The straight people being homophobic is the joke.
Yeah.
And not being able to understand how to, act around these queer acquaintances. Like they don't understand.
I think that was the intention at the time on Seinfeld with the not that there's anything wrong with that. The joke was supposed to be on their absurd squeamishness and not on gay characters.
Absolutely.
But if you're talking about like how successful you are in treating the subject, I don't remember what year Seinfeld did that. Probably
after this. It would be after this.
Oh, okay.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Would have been before this, probably.
You think so?
Yeah. But similar time. It would have been around 93, 94 would be my guess. It's all around the same
And if
time.
any of you don't know what we're talking about, just Google Seinfeld. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
If you don't know what we're talking about, how are you even listening to this show still?
It's true.
We're 40 minutes deep talking about a show.
I would say at the start of this episode, my first reaction was like, I'm very concerned with where this is going.
Yeah.
I was too.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, I gotta watch this.
I trusted Barry that,
and on balance.
That's why I was like, I gotta watch this because I'm not sitting through a gay panic episode if it's bad.
We don't want to watch something that's terribly.
The two characters are so wonderfully nuanced and have so many different layers to them, and just being like guest characters. Like I was like, these guys would fit really well into this show.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
To be perfectly honest, those characters, we're talking about the upstairs neighbors who are gay. Yeah. They were more well-rounded, interesting characters than a lot of the regular cast, to be perfectly honest. And
absolutely, I know more about them than I know about the.
Yeah. They become characters that you want to spend more time hanging out with within a minute of seeing them on screen. In a way that doesn't quite land with the other characters.
Because they're kind of they're so interesting. Because like one is like older and kind of like. Balding, and he's like, a bit of a dad type, and then the younger one is kind of a sporty jock type who does not fit into
Played by Milos.
And they're just, I don't know,
they're both into sports, they're both into
theater and
they're both in it, but
they're very like kind and generous, and the whole thing of help. Well, at the beginning of the episode, Jonathan's apartment was flooded, and that's kind of the entree into these characters, is giving him a place to crash while his apartment is being repaired. And, I need to fax this to my agent. Well, we have a fax machine. Let me help you out with that. Let me make you a sandwich. And they're just the nicest people in the building, basically.
Yeah.
Actually, that's an interesting. So them being more interesting might actually bring up what my main problem with the show is just. The writing is fine, and like most of the jokes land. The performances are good. The characters themselves,
they're just flat, except for Trudy. I really enjoy Trudy.
Yes.
She is the most fun character.
She's a lot of fun. Yeah. So Ming-Na Wen's character,
especially
right?
in the pilot when she's just so amused by this like brutal blind date that's happening. She's trying to kind of provoke it and get more, she's just trying to stir the pot a little bit, and like is finding it very, very amusing.
What's good about her is she plays, the snappy, smart friend who makes quips calling out other characters, but they do it in a way where, and this is a lot to do with her performance. I don't know how much of this is in the writing, but it's a lot to do with her performance, that she comes across as someone who is having fun hanging out and wants to be there, and she's like enjoying. She's not the character that we often make fun of as like the OU guys character who just finds everyone insufferable. She's just like bemused by things and is like very happy to like make jokes about stuff, but she's enjoying hanging out, so we're enjoying hanging out too.
And she makes fun of Sam, who's her husband, a lot, and puts him in his place, and like,
which is warranted.
I like her.
Very warranted.
I liked her referring to Jonathan as her clueless het friend.
Yeah,
and I was like, I like that.
Yeah.
I also, the characters like each other. They like hanging out with each other. We've talked a lot on this show about how like sometimes it works to have the conflict completely come from within and have the characters bouncing off and not like each other. But that's a rare thing to get right.
Yeah.
And more people lean into it than should. Whereas this is another show, again, it's why Friends works too. It's why Seinfeld works too. They like each other. You're not constantly questioning why they're in the same room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and this show even has a great start where he doesn't like Janine's husband.
I was just about to say that. Yeah. He doesn't like Matt at first. Yeah.
But through the course of them they bond, and I like that the show doesn't really call attention to this. They bond at the blind date dinner because they start enjoying kind of fucking with the name dropper together, and they're like patting each other on the shoulder, like getting good ones, because she's only dropping first names, which is what name droppers do, like like, oh,
they
George,
want you to ask,
and Jonathan's just throwing shit out like, George Washington Bush, oh, so close, and then another where he says Jesus, and then the husband goes Christ. And I was like, that does so that part, and then from that point on, that plot never doesn't seem to, I mean, in the 2 episodes we saw, but they like each other enough to hang out. I
will say, you mentioned before how this show is lots of tropes. There's also lots of sitcom logic in these ways that I mean, I know, Brynn, you were commenting on this a lot when you were watching the show, but I'll just name a couple of basic examples. In episode 6, they get a hot tub on
a free trial,
a free 24-hour free trial of a hot tub that they have in the living room of their rented apartment in a high-rise, which makes less than 0 cents.
How did they fill it, and how did they drain it? I don't understand.
It makes sense when Kramer does it because it's Kramer.
Because it's Kramer. You can sort of get on board because he's so kooky and he knows so many kooky other people. Whereas this just feels it feels way more contrived.
Now, I just realized an interesting little tidbit, though. I wonder if this was intentional. So, at the beginning of the episode, we find out that Jonathan's apartment suffered a lot of flooding damage because of something to do with a cat chewing through a pipe, or I forget exactly what the explanation was. But he's been booted out of his apartment for a few days while it's being repaired because of flood damage. Meanwhile, his friends have this hot tub in their living room, which is such a high risk of causing the exact same kind of flood damage. And I wonder if we were supposed to think that.
Yeah, I don't know, but they definitely, if they meant to do that,
makes sense. Yeah,
if they meant to do that, it was way too subtle, and they
didn't put a button on it. No. And I also don't know. I don't know what the point of it was, despite it's a nice visual scene where they're all in the hot tub together.
No, there's basically no payoff.
Appreciated that even for a mid-90s show, I was expecting some hypersexualization. Wasn't there. I was like, okay, well, I don't really know what you're up to here, guys. Is big hot tub buying ad space?
What I don't understand is the implication of a free trial of a hot tub is that you're trying it to buy it. But how can you buy a hot tub and have it permanently, again, in the middle of your living room in a rented apartment in a high rise of a New York City
building? To be clear, this hot tub takes up 40% of the living room.
Yeah, it's nonsense.
This feels an awful lot like season 6 of a show.
Yeah,
right, where you've stopped asking these questions.
Yeah, it's very early.
I'm too early.
It was very distracting. I couldn't enjoy the visual gag because all I kept thinking about is how the fuck were they pumping the water out of it when they had to return it? Who was doing that?
Okay, and example number 2. In the pilot, right off the get-go in the pilot, we're introduced to this cable guy who's hanging out in his apartment and eventually it's the cable guy and the doorman are just hanging out even though he's gone. That's fine. That was funny.
That all worked for me. It was
funny. All worked for me that they're hanging out there. But the way they brought the cable guy into the plot was that he was there to install the pay-per-view for this fight. That doesn't happen.
Yes, it does.
When you get pay-per-view, they don't have to send a guy to every home that pays for pay-per-view.
They did.
No, you
if you didn't have cable, they did.
Okay, so is the implication that he had no cable before?
Probably.
And this fight, this title fight, motivated him to not just pay the fee for the pay-per-view for that fight, but to get cable at all.
Yeah, it seems like a lot. It seems like it would have been way easier just to go to a sports bar and watch the fight.
Yeah.
Than to have this whole setup happen.
It's a really sitcom logic-y sort of thing.
It's a lot of sitcom logic. Like, it's everything we talk about on this podcast. Like, it's a lot of sitcom logic. It's a lot of tropes. It's a lot of, like, I don't know. It's all the things that are kind of, like, silly about sitcoms and that make people roll their eyes about them.
Great actors and
crossovers, all of it.
With great actors and great dialogue, you can get away with a hell of a lot of this sitcom logic.
But it almost
you're right.
If they made it meta, if they made it like such a thing, then maybe it could have been funny.
It's 95.
I know.
95.
There was even a paella reference in the first episode.
I love it. Yeah.
Ernest Borgnine's basically like, what am I going to do with all this paella?
You made me really want paella much more than the Seinfeld episode did.
It's funny.
It actually made me want to try paella. Well, I have tried it.
What? You've never had paella?
No, I have. It made me want to eat it. The other thing was like, so you mentioned the actor who plays the cable guy.
Larry Miller. So
why do I know that? He's in an episode of Seinfeld as the doorman.
Yeah.
And he's introduced to this show as the cable guy who was let into his apartment by the doorman. So I had to laugh when he said doorman in one of his first lines, because the whole plot in Seinfeld is about the doorman like letting people in who aren't supposed to be let in. So I was like, is that intentional? That's got to be intentional.
I don't know. It's
maybe accidentally came
I'm
into
always
the right.
finding these coincidences. And of course, Mark Moses, the husband of
who plays Matt, the husband of Janine. Yeah,
Janine's husband. You may know as Duck Phillips from Mad Men.
Thank you. Fuck.
Yeah,
that's who that was.
Yeah, he's Duck.
I love Duck.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very good. He always plays like kind of an unhinged, sort of like privileged, sort of waspy guy. Like he always plays that character.
Yeah, but with that old-timey energy.
Yes, he has that old-timey energy of like a 1950s businessman.
Yeah.
But he's always kind of unhinged.
There was even the line, I wrote it down, where he's talking about Jonathan, who's a writer, and he refers to him as like, the kid's a talent.
Yeah.
That's verbatim what he says.
So I truly have to bring up the journey that I went on in exploring this. So I think we have a running list of shows. And although this was ultimately like a berry pick, I think I originally put it on the list because, like I said earlier, I watched this show and I have so many distinctive memories of it. And one of those, and this is funny because the Matt character has a little more life in this other episode. So after we watched the 2 episodes that we were supposed to for the purpose of this recording, I then was telling Aaron about how I have this distinctive memory of an episode of The Single Guy, at least I think it was The Single Guy. I'm fairly certain it was The Single Guy, where they are convinced that they have found a lost Beatles song and they want to sell it because it's right after the release of the Beatles 1 anthology. And so they're kind of like trying to like jump on that like bandwagon. And basically, so I'm telling Aaron about it. And it's to the point where I'm actually singing the song that they found that they thought was the Lost Beatles song. And I'm like, how do I remember this? Like, just like Barry, you were saying, how do I know that that's Larry Miller? How the fuck did I remember a song that was featured in an obscure sitcom from 1996? And like, it was a joke song, but how do I remember it and why? And why does my brain hold on to these things? It makes no sense whatsoever. I feel like I need to talk to a therapist about it, because it's like there's things in my daily life that I cannot hold on to or remember, but like this particular, like these obscure things from these shows is just like, it just is nested in my brain. It's like a little fungus in my brain that's just there and it won't go away. But anyway, I remembered this episode. I was like, Aaron, I need to find this episode and we need to watch it right now, because I have this like memory and I just want to like confirm that the memory is all correct and that the song is exactly how I remember it.
She spent like an hour trawling through these episodes.
Because it wasn't obvious which, like, I didn't watch them all. I just kind of fast forwarded through them because it wasn't obvious based on the descriptions which one was this episode. And then eventually I found it, and I can't remember if it was episode 11. I think it was episode 11. And finally I found it, and yes, it was exactly how I remembered. They're shopping at a flea market, because that's also a trope. And they buy this humidor. Matt buys it specifically. And they find inside the humidor an old a tape, like a reel-to-reel tape. And of course, Sam works in the music industry and has access to all the old, like recording. Like is he an engineer,
something
a recording
like
engineer, something like that?
Surprisingly not well established precisely what he does.
Yeah, so basically they're pumped to figure out what's on this tape, because it could be anything. They're like, oh, maybe it's like missing 18 minutes of the Watergate calls or whatever. And like, so they make this whole joke, and then there's a scene where Sam is listening to it, and it's this corny song, which, can we cut it in? But it's basically this like really cheesy song that goes, your love is like a roller coaster, I'm hotter than a toaster, yeah, 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 yeah. And then it's like, woo, at the end.
1, 2, 3. Your love's like a roller coaster, I'm hotter than a toaster, yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh my God, it's the Beatles.
And they keep playing it over and over in the episode. And there's like this like little intro at the beginning where a couple of the guys are speaking in kind of a Liverpool accent. So they're convinced that it's like the lost Beatles recording. And so they go on this mission and they're playing it for different people to get their opinion. And everyone's like, no, it's not, because this is crap. And this is, and they're like, okay, we get that it's crap, but that could be why they never released it. And so it's basically Sam and Matt on this mission. And that's like the episode where you kind of see Matt come to life, because they're both just like pumped to share this recording with people. And they're both like watching people listen to it. And at the end,
and they think they're going to sell it for huge money.
Yeah, they think they're going to make millions. And then at the very end, when it goes, ooh, they're both like, ooh, like, so they're like, it's like a funny little thing where they buddy up to try to like do this. And then, so basically they're like, okay, they give up because it's clearly not the Beatles or whatever. And then like finally someone offers to buy it randomly and for like $50. So they're like, all right, well, whatever. So they go to meet this guy, and it turns out the implication is that it's like Paul McCartney, like in a limo.
In a limo.
And he's like, oh, like, thank God, like I,
been looking for this for years.
Since Germany or whatever. Yeah. And like,
that's funny.
Yeah, it was funny.
And obviously buying it to bury it so that it never sees the light of day.
But he only paid them $50 for it, and they were all like freaking out, obviously. But but it's just some guy putting on like a cheesy Liverpool accent, like in a limo, like they don't see you don't see him, and there's all this stuff where like the humidor, it looks like it says made in Liverpool, so that's more evidence for them. But then they clean up the humidor, and then it says made in like Liverpool, like
it was like Liverpool, Ohio or something.
Yeah. And they're like, well, it could still be them. It could still be them. Maybe they bought this humidor because they thought it was cool that it was like Liverpool, even though it's not really Liverpool. Yeah. So they're like on this like wild goose chase to try to get this, to figure out this mystery. Yeah. And that specific storyline of this specific obscure sitcom has stuck in my brain for 30 years. Like, it's pathetic. Like, it's so sad. And
I think it's funny though. I think it's a funny episode. I'm gonna watch that episode.
Whenever I think of like the Beatles, like that anthology, I think of that episode because I think of like, you know, the 90s like hype and whatever. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's so silly. But it's so weird, the things that stick in your brain. And, you know, some of the feedback we've gotten from some like listeners is like, they'll be like, oh my God, you just pulled that out of my brain. Like I forgot that existed, but it's always, you know, a certain character, a certain, you know, that is like the power of like TV, like not to be too philosophical, but it is like a thing. Like if you're watching something, it just like imprints on you in a weird way. It's funny to like, and jarring to, as an adult, revisit it and be like, oh my God, I have this vivid memory of this particular moment playing out in front of me.
Well, you know what you're reminding me of is this thought I had about this show, which is that I think part of what I enjoyed about watching these 2 episodes and why I might consider watching a few more is that because it is so successful at achieving, let's call it like the archetype of the 90s New York 30-something single hangout show, because it is so capable in like nailing that vibe, even if regardless of how you may compare it to a Seinfeld or a Friends, when you watch it, it transports you back in time to watching a show in that era because it does nail that vibe very well. And so
very, very well put. Yes, I agree.
So I was hit with a powerful level of nostalgia watching this show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even nostalgia for something I've never seen, but it felt
I've never watched it, and I felt as nostalgic about it as you did, Brynn.
I made a comment to Aaron about how, like, wouldn't it be weird if, like, there were, like, you know how, like, certain genres really attract, like, from, you know, bygone eras, really attract people, and there's people that are really connoisseurs of a certain genre of art, whether it's, like, you know, specific, like, you know, like, Tin Pan Alley music, or whether it's, you know, jazz music from the 1950s, or whether it's like whatever. Like, what if like sitcoms set in New York City from the 90s became one of those things? Like, it is such specific.
Why couldn't it?
Yeah,
why
it's such a specific type of pop culture.
It is specific, and also like New York, the New York of it is not just that New York is the biggest city in the United States.
It's a specific
there's a specific
environment,
nature to not just New York, but like Manhattan.
Sitcom New York.
Sitcom New York.
Oh my God, this could be like a spin-off spin-off podcast just on the New York sitcoms.
Yeah. The New York of sitcoms is not 100% like the New York of real life.
Yeah.
No. But it is a
because it's all shot in LA still.
Well, actually, so I read
on that same city set.
I read that this show actually used the Seinfeld backlot.
Oh, that's funny.
Which was built for Seinfeld. There was a New York street. For anyone who doesn't know, in LA, in a studio backlot, they built a New York street for Seinfeld. But then many other shows and movies obviously went on to use it, and this is one of them. But they built like a few blocks of extremely realistic, like Manhattan street in a backlot in LA. So, but this show has that New York 90s sitcom vibe. It has a particular hangout feel that is so specific and so nostalgic. But I also want to talk about like the whole dating relationship, married, single commentary in the show. Because what's interesting, I was thinking about it, like Seinfeld, you have 4 people in New York who are all single, and none of them necessarily really want to settle down or be in a relationship. And if they even tried, they'd be pretty dysfunctional at it. Friends, you have 6 friends hanging out in New York who at the start of the show are all single, but there's a lot of will they or won't theys. There's a lot of relationships that succeed and then fail and then succeed again, to the extent, like, in my opinion,
you're left with one single friend by the end of the show.
In my opinion, Friends eventually becomes a bit of a soap opera because of it.
Joey.
And then he leaves.
Yeah, he's the only one who gets a spinoff.
Yeah. But like Friends is very much this show about people who all want to be in a relationship, but it takes them all a long time to succeed at it. Seinfeld is about people who don't necessarily want to be. Mad About You, from the same cinematic universe, is about a couple who is in a relationship already, and they are not necessarily juxtaposed against single friends. It's just them, and it's about their marriage. This show, in theory, should fit into that universe as a unique entity in the sense that it's the one that juxtaposes the main character, the literal single guy, against his friends who are in relationships. They're trying to show both of these things and how they play off each other, which could have evolved into something that works in an interesting way if it was given enough time.
Yeah, I agree. And it's nice to see two happily married couples without resorting to any of the stupid sitcom, like, you know, negativity about your spouses constantly like being thrown in your faces.
She's an egg and he's a schlub.
Yeah.
You know?
Like they're just two good functional couples that are just in a group of friends, you know. And yeah, I mean, I think we see this hybridization happen a lot more over time. I mean, you know, like Friends would later do it with like Monica and Chandler being married and the rest of them not. And then, you know, How I Met Your Mother has that mix of single and married life. So it is really interesting.
It's interesting how back then it was like the only type of committed couple you could be is a married couple. Like you couldn't just be, you know, lifelong
having
partners
a good time.
Or
no. Like David Putty. We're just having a good time. Oh, well then it's simple. You're both going to hell. No, wait, this is bogus, man.
No, just relax. It'll only feel like an eternity.
Yeah. Oh, man.
All right. We could talk about this forever, but
we'll move on.
Yeah.
I do just want to lastly say, because we talked about Jessica Hecht in terms of her contradiction of characters between those two shows, but I did want to note, like, I thought she was really good in this show.
She's good in everything.
And
I really liked her relationship with Jonathan.
I did too.
It was cute.
And I thought she has a really interesting performance style that sits in an interesting way in a sitcom. It reminded me of this, on the one hand, this like dreamy energy of a golden age Hollywood movie star, the way that she would speak in an almost like...
Do you have a crush on Jessica Hecht?
No, I don't, but like she's trying...
It's okay, man.
It's okay.
No, but she's trying to sell Jonathan on the idea of a relationship, and she's speaking in this romanticized sort of way about it. And it doesn't come across as like totally forced and silly. Like she makes her character very believable and very interesting and stand out from the typical bantery chatter. Like a lot of the other characters to me almost felt a little too on at times. The way that the dialogue would play so snappy and so perfect. And so everyone has that witty remark locked and loaded. And it just felt like a little too perfect. And sometimes
she's a little bit more naturalistic.
She's naturalistic in a really good way. That's all.
No, I agree. And I like that she really cares about Jonathan and like their friendship. I like that, you know, they're the friendship, right? Like they're the ones who have like the history together and like they're, you know, she's super supportive of him. And like, even
almost
though
a Brynn and Barry situation.
It's kind of a Brynn and Barry situation, right? And like,
but
that's
you
a similar.
My husband more than me. So
true. Very. Yeah. I love your husband very, very much. But actually, even that plot line of having to like your friend's significant other is relatable. I mean, I've had to do that.
It's true.
I've had to do that before where you're like, because he doesn't like that he doesn't like him. It's not like he knows that he should.
He wishes he could,
He wishes he could.
Eventually kind of does. Eventually they turn a corner. Yeah.
Yeah. I liked all that. So yeah, it's a fun little show. Glad I watched it, you know, in another, like in a world where Friends wasn't as successful, this show probably would have been, you know.
Yeah. This show could have filled the void.
It's nowhere as like where Friends really works over this is on Friends. Everybody's equal.
Yeah.
Everybody's the main character on Friends.
It's a true ensemble.
It's a true ensemble.
Yeah.
And Seinfeld's not a true ensemble per se, but it's kind of like you can see the way that the interconnections between them.
Seinfeld becomes a true ensemble. It becomes
one. At the start, Jerry's the centerpiece and the others are like kind of his friends circling around him and like, moons orbiting a planet. But they all grow, and you're right. It becomes an ensemble where you have episodes that are balanced.
We get to a point where it's not weird to see an episode of George and Kramer doing something together, or even when they do have the random George and Elaine episodes, they work really well.
Yeah, it's hard to believe in this show that there could have been an episode that would focus entirely or primarily on one of the other characters other than Jonathan. Whereas,
it's nice to hear that there is that episode of Sam and Matt hanging out.
So maybe it does go more into that than would have seemed from the 2 episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess analyzed. I'm saying that, but I feel like Friends sort of starts out in a way that like it is sort of focused a little on Rachel and to an extent Ross as well.
Well, yeah, I think Friends did a good job eventually of growing into a thing where on any given episode you don't necessarily know who the focal point is going to be or if there's going to be multiple people who get their own plots. And Seinfeld, of course, was like relatively pioneering in that, in the sense that even looking at the titles of the episodes, there were Seinfeld episodes where every character would get their own plot, but the one that the episode is named for was often not Jerry. It was someone else. It would be a George or Elaine sort of centric story. Anyway, I'm sure, Brynn, you are dying to find some way, shape, or form to connect this show with Friends. I don't know if it's going to be possible.
I mean, it's probably a massive web. Like, it's probably layers and layers of connections, but I just decided to focus on the numerous 1-degree connections. So, first and foremost, obviously, we have the crossover.
It's our first Friends character.
Yeah. So it's an actual Friends character inserted into the world of this sitcom. So that's like more than 1 degree. That's probably like 1.5. I don't know.
It's a zero. Let's just call it a 0 degree.
Zero.
And obviously Jessica Hecht as well is like at the same time co-star, like recurring on Friends. So so we have that. We also have Jonathan Silverman guest starring on Friends. And I looked at everyone else and I couldn't find other people in the main cast having guest starred, but like at least 4 of the directors also directed Friends, including Pamela Fryman, Alan Meyerson, Andrew Zhao, and Gail Mancuso. There's some writer crossovers. There's like, it's like they're very enmeshed. It's very enmeshed with the Friends world. So it's like multiple 1-degree connections, probably a bunch of other incestuous, like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th degree connections. It's just like they were very much of the same time and the same era and the same pool of talent.
Yeah.
All swimming together, and there's lots of connections.
The same apartment hot tub full of talent.
Yeah, and obviously there's like lots of connections to Seinfeld as well. So it's like very much that pool of Thursday night NBC sitcom crew. They were all just in bed with each other or in the hot tub together, but however you want to say it. That's it.
Nice,
succinct
love
segment.
Spin us off.
Oh boy, I mean, I have like a lot of little notes here on this. I mean, everybody involved was already pretty established, I would say. Like, everybody had at least one kind of thing, except I would say Joey Slotnick. This was kind of like his big, like the first big thing he was in. But then after that, he was literally in everything. Like, I feel like I couldn't watch a TV show or a movie in the 90s without seeing Joey Slotnick pop in there.
Yeah, I had to look that up too.
Yeah.
I was so curious about him.
Yeah, so he's in movies like Twister, Blast from the Past. TV, we had him appearing in the show Working, The Nanny, Boston Public, Alias, Nip Tuck, The Good Wife, and most recently Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Like, he's just had a very storied career and continues to. Jonathan Silverman, of course, the star of the show, he already kind of was a name. You know, he had been in some like comedies, including the Weekend at Bernie's movie. And he was already out there. He was already kind of like this like Gen X like comedy guy. And he got this big like leading role sitcom. Unfortunately, he didn't have many like leading roles after that, except for in a couple of movies that he wrote and directed. He like continues to work in TV and film, of course. He's like, he
really was just 95's Josh Radnor then.
He kind of was, yeah. I mean, he's kind of become this sort of one and done type. Like, he just pops in as a memorable guest star in a lot of TV shows. Most recently, he did like a 13 episode stint on Good Girls. And then as far as his directing credits, he directed National Lampoon's Another Dirty Movie and a indie movie, I know, called The Opposite Sex. So, he's kind of,
I remember that.
Yeah. And then Ming-Na Wen, very prolific career that is still continuing, as we've already established. During The Single Guy, she was also a part of the cast of ER, and she continued her epic run as Dr. Jing Mei Chen until 2004. She's also co-starred in Stargate Universe, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., The Book of Boba Fett, most recently Gremlins, The Secrets of the Mogwai, which is interesting. She's done tons of voice work as well. You can look at her IMDb. There's like tons of like video game and like sort of comic book era and like Star Wars property animated series. So yeah, and then memorable guest spots recently are some of our favorite shows. Aaron, she was on Nora from Queens playing an aunt.
Oh, sweet.
And she was in Hacks as well, but I can't recall the specific character, but I think she might have been a comedian in Hacks.
Good shows.
Yeah, great shows. Mark Moses, we've already said, was Duck Phillips on Mad Men. Very memorable role. He kind of has like such a cringy like downfall. Like, he's such a like, in that show, like his arc is pretty tragic. He's definitely he can really play that part so well of a guy that should have everything, because he sort of embodies that like sort of like privileged white guy businessman type, but he does such a great job of showing when that can go really dark. Like, and that is, you've seen that in a few things he's been in, not only Mad Men, but in Desperate Housewives. He plays one of the husbands who's like a kind of a dark character. He also has been in some like procedural type shows, including The Killing. He played Lieutenant Eric Carlson. Recently, and I'm curious to watch this, he played George W. Bush on the Showtime series, The First Lady. So it's like it's this Showtime series where it's sort of profiling different first ladies, and he plays George W. Bush, and I'm like, oh, that could be really good. Jessica Hecht as well. Like, we've sung her praises before. She's just great. She's, been at it for years. She continued to play Susan on Friends after her time on The Single Guy. And she's had many guest starring roles over the years, and very memorable recurring roles. Some of her recent credits that I'd like to shout out are The Boys, which we don't really watch, but I know you watch, Barry. Yep. The Sinner, which she's really good on, and one of my favorites is the show Special on Netflix. Barry, I don't know if you've seen it. It's so good. But
So she
plays.
Forgot she was in that.
She plays like the mom of the main character, Ryan, played by Ryan O'Connell. So it's Ryan O'Connell's series that he created and stars in, and they have such a like very interesting dynamic. They have this like codependent relationship, and it's just really well done. And like, there's like a lot of stuff with her trying to date in middle age, and like, I don't know. It's just a really, really good show. Ernest Borgnine continued to be Ernest Borgnine and popping up in things to the delight of every audience until his death in 2012. So, he didn't slow down after this, short-lived show. Another person we should mention who was more of a character but wasn't featured in the episodes that we watched, Sean Michael Howard. So he plays a recurring character, I think, in season 2.
Yeah, there was a retool for season 2.
Yeah, so he plays another friend, and it's unfortunate. I wish we had watched an episode with him in it, because he's not even in the other episode I was talking about. But anyway, he's also had a very lengthy career in TV comedy and drama. So, he's been in The Practice, the movie Thursday, NYPD Blue, The Rookie recently, and he has a lengthy voice acting career as well. He voiced a character called Smokey in the Eddie Murphy animated series, The PJs. Do you guys remember The PJs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was in that. And then, we also have Olivia Dabo, who played the name dropper, and she has a bit of a recurring role. She pops up in a few episodes of this, so I thought she's worth mentioning. She's been in many classic 90s TV shows, including Party of Five, Third Rock, From the Sun, Spin City, and then guest starred in a lot of procedurals, including Law and Order, Criminal Intent, Code Black. The list goes on. And then finally, we have Brad Hall, who, of course, we said was Mr. Julia Louis-Dreyfus. He was already kind of an established person at the time. Had that stint on SNL and, had this kind of status as a legendary sketch actor. And he met Julia Louis-Dreyfus when they were in college doing sketch comedy together. So she joined the sketch troupe that he founded, which I thought was kind of cute. He also created the show Watching Ellie right after this, which was a Julia Louis-Dreyfus vehicle that didn't last. It was the one that wasn't successful. But it only had, I think, 2 seasons or something like that. But anyway, it starred her and Steve Carell, which is interesting.
Yeah, I've been meaning to watch that one day if I can find it.
When was that?
2002 or something.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was that was 7 years.
Or not right after. Yeah, not right after. Sorry.
I was sorry. It's she was on Seinfeld for the rest of the decade. I was really confused.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, he kind of has had big gaps in his career, but he has, popped up and done stuff. He directed some episodes of Veep. But
and don't forget that he plays himself in Curb Your Enthusiasm.
He pops up in acting roles too. He's an interesting guy where there are these people in show business where you see them occasionally and they're sort of in the orbit of very famous people, and they just kind of pop up occasionally and do stuff because those people are oh yeah, my husband or my friend who is super talented but isn't that active, and they'll just pop up.
See last episode's Christine Taylor.
Exactly. It's a similar thing. But I would say she was more of a star that kind of fizzled out, whereas he was never really a star. True. Yeah, he was more of a
more behind the scenes,
more of a behind the scenes dude. So yeah, and who knows? Could be one of those things where there's all these writers that are out there that never get their stuff off the ground. Who knows what unseen pilots he made and what you never know.
Yeah, a lot of great talent that exists,
Yeah.
Speaking of which, should we check in with Mr. Producer, who I know is working on developing a show right now?
You might as well. Hey, Aaron, good timing. Was just taking a lunch break.
I half expected your new assistant to pick up, actually. They've been a bit intense on our last few calls.
I am right here, Mr. Yeager, taking meeting notes as per usual.
Oh, sorry about that, Raleigh. I didn't know you were on the line.
I am always on the line, Mr. Yeager.
Oh well, sorry again.
I assure you, it is, as you podcast people like to say, no worries.
Is that something we say?
So, kid, what's been going on? What are you talking about this week?
We talked about the single guy. You know, Jonathan Silverman and...
Oh, sure. Not a bad little program. Did a couple of years. Yeah, you betcha.
Yeah, it was okay. How's your sitcom progressing?
That's it. It's going great. Thanks so much for asking. This week, I've been holding a little competition for some potential writers.
Comedy writers?
Some, sure. But, you gotta look around, get the best of the best. But 3 of them, they got the best shot right now. Let's see, one of them did a hard-hitting little documentary about okra production. Great buzz out of TIFF. We're also looking at this one from this older gent. He actually just did some work on a couple of huge Super Bowl ads this year.
Oh, which ones?
Those he gets me ones.
The Jesus ads?
Sure. But tell you, this kid, it's not so much a kid, he's about 68. He wrote a funny little 2-hander about 2 parrot trainers who fall in love amidst the sweltering summer of Ohio in 1995.
And third?
Well, you gotta go to this well every now and then. He's one of the studio guy's nephews. Apparently he's big on the talk tick, does impressions of trees.
TikTok?
No, I've still got time.
That's quite the selection of writers there. Now, is this a set idea you've been toying around with, or are they coming to you with fully fleshed out scripts?
Well, collaboration is, the name of the game, but right now they're all working off a pretty rigid outline.
Can we maybe get a little bit of a taste of what the show's about?
Sure. All right. So, right now, the show is about a famous magician. He's a bit down on his luck. Suddenly, his ventriloquist brother dies in a tragic but not wholly unfunny accident down at the balloon factory where he works. Next thing you know, the brother's dummy's living with the magician, and get this, he's possessed with the soul of...
his brother.
No, their childhood neighbor, Mr. Reynolds, who, right now, we're eyeing Jack Nicholson to do the voice.
Pretty sure he's retired.
I won't be when he gets wind of this project.
So, the show is about...
a magician, his dead brother's dummy, and they're trying to open a pet shop, which, in this economy, hilarity ensues. And that's it.
That's it. Well, be sure to keep us posted.
You bet, kid.
Mr. Producer, I have Francis Joe Johnson on the line.
Amy Joe's cousin. I gotta take this.
Why would his last name be Joe Johnson? That doesn't make any sense.
I'm very excited to see the pilot for this show.
Yeah, it's gonna be wild.
It's gonna be something.
I guess we should just check in to see if anyone has any leftovers. I know I have a few.
I have one. Just one. And I never have leftovers, so that's interesting.
For it,
You go first.
I couldn't figure out a way to just throw this in. I was so impressed with the set for Jonathan's apartment. It's still bigger than it would be, but it's about as
shockingly modest. Yeah,
it's about as modest as anybody's letting happen on TV.
Yeah,
it's mostly a one room. It's tight. Like he has a bedroom. But his office and his community space and his kitchen are all kind of crammed in together. He's got a very small stove. It was so close to being a realistic apartment. And I thought that was a nice touch for Jonathan. Because even though they established that he is semi-successful, he clearly wouldn't be he's not successful enough to have a great New York apartment. And clearly somebody made a point of being like, no, don't give him a huge thing.
Yeah. And it's furnished in a very low-key sort of...
I'm a single guy.
Just, your average...
style.
Yeah, it's very realistic single guy in 1995 in New York style. It's I agree. It works. Yeah, so in doing a little bit of research on this show, one interesting fact is that apparently it's one of the highest rated shows to ever get canceled because, we can speculate that it benefited from its placement in the lineup between Friends and Seinfeld. But in general, in terms of the level of viewership that it had at the point when they decided to give it the axe. It's one of the highest rated shows to ever be canceled. So that's kind of interesting and unfortunate for this show. I liked the line, the "Hey Neighbors" line, which was in episode 6. They refer to people going from being "Hey Neighbors" to actual friends. And someone's like, what does that mean? They're like, hey. And I thought that was cool. I guess my final thought on the show is that like it mostly works. I agreed that with you. It was kind of like, it's fine. It works. I'm surprised, frankly, that I didn't watch it at the time because it feels like it works as well as a lot of the stuff that I watched at the time. Maybe better than a lot of the stuff I watched at the time. But it feels like, and maybe I'm partly just bumping on the title itself, like it is too much dependent on this specific premise. Like you can imagine the pitch. This is how I wrote it. It's like, his friends are married. He's single. They want him to be married like him. But does he want to settle down? Tune in Thursday nights at 8:30 to find out. And it just feels like it's just wearing that on its sleeve between the title and that like working its way into the plots. Whereas shows like Seinfeld, Friends, you name it, like all these other hangout shows, yeah, dating, relationships, marriage, those are all layers of those shows. But you never know quite what you're going to get in terms of like the point of an episode when you actually tune in. That's a layer. That's like in the background.
I imagine with this show, they would much prefer that. They probably would have preferred a different title, my guess. or a different title might have carried it further.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that what this show is, hey, Mom, can we get friends? No, we've got friends at home. And this is friends at home. This is this is the less good version.
Yeah.
Right.
Like it was high, like you said, it was highly rated. I'm sure when it got canceled, somebody was like, why are we canceling? They're like, I don't know. We already have this show. Let's take a gamble on something else.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
That Was a Show is created and hosted by Brynn Burney, Andrew Barry Helmer, and myself, Aaron Yeager. It's a production of Radio Gizmo in Toronto, Canada. Subscribe, rate, review, and share. Follow us on Instagram and tell your friends about it. That Was a Show?
Radio Gizmo.